I'd like to now take the opportunity to introduce Janna Wale. She is a Gitxsan from Gitanmaax First Nation as well as Cree Métis. She is committed to the complex human environmental systems approach and believes that the lens can be used when looking for ways to bridge Western and Indigenous climate work. At the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, Janna's research focus on climate resilience in Indigenous communities using a seasonal rounds model. She holds a Master's of Science and IGS Sustainability and a Bachelor of Nursing Honors in Natural Resources Science. So without further ado, we welcome Janna Wale.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Janna Wale, and I'm happy to have been invited here to share a little bit about Indigenous climate science, as well as some of my climate-related research and how education is really important in terms of making a difference in terms of fighting climate change. So in Indigenous communities, who you are and who your family is, as well as where you're from, all inform how you're connected to the land, and in explaining your relations and how you came to occupy space here, you're essentially offering context for the knowledge that you hold. So your worldview and how you show up in the world, as well as the lens that you use to view the world, is made up of your family, your connection to the land, your history, and your place that you're from. So combined, all of these things have influence on the things that you value, the knowledge that you hold, and how you see the world and how you approach your work in school. So essentially holding space to speak to who you are, who your ancestors are, and their connection to place is especially important, when we're talking about climate change and in the natural sciences. So Simgiat, Segamhana, Nakabawilsa, Kamahilu, Janna Wale, Gitxsan Mi'i, Nok, Laurel Whale, Cree Métis from near Spiritwood and Meadow Lake, Nikwot, Cliff Whale, Wakalak, Gitxsan, Guhamalgodi, Wagatam. So my name is Janna Wale. I'm from Gitanmaax First Nation on my dad's side. I'm also Cree Métis on my mother's side, as well as English and Irish. And my parents are Cliff Whale and Laurel here. My paternal grandparents are Victor Whale, who's a member of Wilkes Points, the Lakiwu or Wolf clan, as well as Judy Marshall, who is my grandmother. My maternal grandparents are Vivian Charette and Ray Tier, and my Métis last names are Charette and Arcan from near Spiritwood and Meadow Lake in Saskatchewan. Like Janet said, I currently hold 2 degrees at Western institutions. So in 2019, I graduated with a Bachelor's of Natural Resource Science from Thompson Rivers University. And also I did some time here at University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus in Kelowna. So I did a Master's of Science in Sustainability, where my work did focus on climate resilience in Indigenous communities. So as a Gitxsan researcher, I often look for ways to bring my culture and my Gitxsan worldview into my work. If you're not familiar with the Gitxsan territory, we are a northwest coastal people. Our territory is about 33,000 square kilometers in kind of the northwest part of British Columbia, near Smithers or Terrace, if you're familiar with that area. Our traditional form of governance in Gitxsan culture is rooted in the Wilk or clan system. So if you remember, I introduced myself talking about my grandfather's clan. There are 4 Gitxsan clans. So we have Wolf, Frog, Fireweed, Killer Whale, as well as Eagle clan. In our cultures, clans are passed down through the mother, which is a reflection of the high value and the importance that we place on our women and girls. So as leaders, our women were responsible for making decisions related to stewarding our territories, and the men would then go out and kind of execute those decisions. In essence, our women were very responsible for maintaining the balance within our territories and upholding our cultural practices that were informed by, stewardship axioms and maintaining that balance that we have as a people with our landscape around us. It's one of the reasons that for thousands of years, we were able to live so sustainably on the landscape. If you're not familiar, again, Gitxsan territory, they did some carbon dating a few years back, and they estimate that we have been in that area for 14,000 years. So we have a strong history of maintaining and stewarding our territories. So if you fast forward to today, I think we're all familiar with how quickly we're experiencing climate change. If you're from the Kelowna area, or even if you watched the news last year, I don't need to tell you that our climate is changing, especially in this region. I think everybody in this room probably has a different experience of climate change. But one of the things I've noticed personally and within my lifetime, other than salmon, is how we're able to harvest samai or huckleberry. So huckleberry is an extremely important species for the Gitxsan territory, as well as the Gitxsan people. So huckleberry provides key health benefits. It's very high in vitamin C, and it provides a strong connection to our culture. Since many of the places that we've been harvesting huckleberry, we've been doing since time immemorial. There are many places in our territory that are very special because of how long we've been harvesting huckleberry there. And there are many stories and protocols in our culture that involve huckleberry, and not to mention the continued opportunity to engage in traditional harvest when we go out and be on the land to get the berries. Huckleberry is also very important to other ecological species like moose and bears, who are key huntable species in our community. So as huckleberry timing begins to shift, we stand to lose a lot of these connecting pieces that huckleberry provides, as well as the teachings that come with it. So during 2021, when I went out to collect my master's data, I was interviewing people in my community. I got to go out and harvest huckleberry, which was actually the same year that the big heat wave happened in BC. So while I was out harvesting huckleberry, I noticed a lot of the berries were smaller and more bitter, and the leaves had a lot of heat switch as well. So what that meant was it took a lot longer for us to be able to go out and get these huckleberries in order to make jam and preserve them for the winter. And so if we're having a hard time harvesting huckleberry, you can imagine it's also hard for people like other animals like moose who also rely on these berries too. Given these impacts, we need to start to think about strategies that can help to address climate change and offer solutions. And in my opinion, one of these solutions is capacity building. So in other words, equipping people to meet these challenges. And of course, one of the most important ways to do this is education. And for me, when I say education, I mean both the traditional school sense in classrooms and universities, but I also mean on the land education. So when I work as an Indigenous scientist, we need all kinds of ways of knowing in order to meet the challenges of climate change. The more voices we are able to include and raise up and bring in, the more likely we are to have holistic and considered solutions that help to achieve the values that we need to see when we're talking about meeting the climate crisis and building climate resilience. So in many government documents, Indigenous knowledges are held up as being able to solve the climate crisis. Concepts like two-eyed seeing are often cited by governments when we're talking about bridging Western and Indigenous sciences together. But when talking from my community a few years ago about this, she said something that really stuck with me. And it's, if you do not consider knowledge with equal weight, the braids will start to unravel and you will not be able to braid them together. So further to this, we need to start to think about how we include our women and girls in these voices and in this braid when we're talking about starting to solve the climate crisis. So by including more lived experiences and the specific roles we all play in our communities, we're going to be creating a better future for everybody.
Wow. Thank you, Janna. Oh my goodness, so many things. I have a question here I wanted to ask you, and then of course we will have an opportunity in a few minutes to ask more, but why is including Indigenous knowledge so important in addressing climate change?
Yeah, I think that's a really big question, but like I kind of alluded to in my discussion, like we have such a history of living on these lands and living sustainably, and I think the more that we're able to bring that back, the stronger we're going to be in developing climate change solutions. One of the ways that Indigenous people would typically live in harmony was through this idea of respect and reciprocity and balance with our natural environment. I think there's an underlying piece that our communities understand that we live within a social ecological system. So this idea that we live within these places and we're intimately tied and connected to the lands and territories that we own. So when we're thinking about, building climate solutions and building climate resilience and educating people, we really need to start bringing back these ideas that force, balance and respect and reciprocity with the lands around us when we're talking about, climate change solutions. And that's so important when we're thinking about education and really framing these things as kind of like going back to balance and going back to connection and really finding these pieces of interconnectedness, I guess.
Love that word, interconnected. Very, very important word. Thank you, Janna.
Thank you. I'm interested with Janna. You had mentioned that the women were so important in your culture and how they did that. And my understanding, or if I didn't hear correctly, I apologize, but I'm wondering, how did the women, in my mind, lose their worth in today's society? Or is that a myth that I have, that they're not as important as they were?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's super important. I think, yeah, you could probably guess the answer is colonization. Like basically what happened is when settlers came over and when contact was made, a lot of our, especially on the West Coast, a lot of the societies here were women led. So women were decision makers, we call it. When I say Simgi at Sigadamhana, that means women, chiefs, matriarchs of high standing. That is how we start our feast hall introductions, and that's what everybody says because our women were chiefs. My Auntie Sadie is still a chief. She's a member of Wilkes Point. She's the chief of the Lakibu clan, and she has final say on everything. When contact was made, Westerners showed up, Europeans showed up, and they were used to interacting with the men. So they showed up and were asking questions to the wrong people. So they were trying to interact with men because they assumed that the men were in charge. So essentially, this is just a legacy of assuming that the wrong people are in positions of power. So women today in our culture are still very highly valued and respected. But it's kind of, we're living in this place now where we're navigating this post-contact and ongoing colonization of our people. So you've probably heard statistics, along where my community is, the Highway of Tears, we've got more women and girls going missing. We're the victims of domestic abuse and all kinds of, tragedies and horrors that come out of this process. But our communities themselves still really respect and value women, sure. So thank you.
Hi, okay. So this one was directed at Janna, but anybody can answer in terms of, you mentioned about the traditional on-land education in terms of the challenges of climate change. So how can we build capacity in our communities as non-scientists normal people?
Yeah, I can answer first. I think the first and most obvious answer is just spend time together. Like I think, I did a master's degree, I did an undergraduate degree, I have the Western education, but I think I've learned a lot more from my parents and grandparents about how to be, living in a good way in this world. Like I spent last year learning how to make fireweed jelly with my mom and my grandma, and we went out and harvested from start to finish, and I had never made jam before. So just that process of learning how to preserve food for the future is part of, if you break it down, it's part of food security, it's part of harvesting, it's part of connection and spending time together. And it seems so simple as just making jam with my mom, but it's so much more than that in terms of how all of those things contribute to, local action and climate change resilience in a way. And I can, use so many examples, going out and fishing with my dad and learning how to be on the land in that way, and spending time with my grandparents and listening to their stories about how things have changed and, the knowledge that they hold as well. So yeah, I think the easy and most obvious answer is just spending time and making connections with others who have all kinds of different knowledges too.
Yes, my very quick question is, well, first of all, I have to give a pre-statement in that I heard an horrendous statistic recently that in 2050, I won't be here, but in 2050, the rural population will only be 10%. So my question is, how are we going to steward the land if 90% of us live in the city?
That's a really interesting statistic, but I think, for my community, we've been there for 14,000 years, and I think we're going to continue to be there, even though people will be relocating. My family has really strong connections to the land and the territories that we live in, and I imagine lots of Indigenous communities feel the same. I think it's a matter of maintaining those connections. I think it's really important to continue to go back to these places and revitalize a lot of our traditions in these places and really continue to keep those connections. So the way that I do this is actually, I think someone else was talking about sport. I play basketball for my community, and that's a way that, living in Nanaimo, because my partner's going to school there, it's a way that we're both able to go back and make sure we spend time there and continue to participate in our community. And while we're there, we do all kinds of traditional things as well. So continuing to go back and make a trip, because our community is about 14 hours from Vancouver. So it's difficult to go back, but still making the effort and the time to go back is really important in maintaining that connection. And I imagine lots of people have different, areas they feel connected to as well. It's about, taking the time and the space to continue to reinforce that relationship, because it is a relationship, and relationships take time and effort. It's the same as, any relationship. So continuing to hold those relationships with the land and, Mother Earth are really important.